Kristen. Hi, folks. Good morning. I'm just going to go ahead and get started and introduce our speaker today. With seas rising, global heat records falling, and storms becoming more and more devastating, the reality of climate change has never been clearer. But with clean energy solutions like wind and solar getting more affordable, batteries getting better, and buildings becoming more efficient every year, the way forward is also clear. The Climate Reality Project, founded by former Vice President Al Gore, is working to accelerate the global shift from the dirty fossil fuels driving climate change to renewables so we can power our lives and economies without destroying our planet. Gary White became a trained climate reality leader in the summer of 2015 in Toronto. He has given 275 presentations to over 19,000 people to date and serves as the co-chair of presentations with the Climate Reality San Francisco Bay Area chapter. Additionally, Gary founded Extinction Rebellion San Mateo, a climate activist group that employs nonviolent, direct action on the peninsula. He is also a leader of Citizens Climate Lobby. Currently retired, Gary spent nearly 30 years as a human resources executive in Silicon Valley with Apple and other big corporations. In addition to HR, he oversaw corporate social responsibility at his workplaces for over 15 years. He holds a BA in sociology from Stony Brook University, a MSW from UC Berkeley, and an executive education certificate in CSR from the Harvard Business School. Gary lives in Belmont, California with his wife of 21 years and is an active member of the Rotary Club of San Mateo. He swims and reads when he is not advocating for solutions to the climate crisis. So without further ado, here's Gary White.
Okay, thank you, Paula. Hello, everyone. Glad to have you with us this morning. I am going to go and directly share my screen. Hopefully that would work out. Can you see it? Okay, good, wonderful. All righty. Well, I'd like to welcome you to my presentation this morning on the climate emergency. The presentation will take approximately 45 minutes, after which we will open it up to Q&A for about 15 minutes. So if you have a question or comment during the presentation, please type it into the chat box. You know the drill, at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to it during the Q&A period. So, first, I'd like to acknowledge the indigenous people that lived on the land that we inhabit. And here in the Bay Area, they are the Ohlone people. So a brief science refresher. I thought this would be helpful to bring everybody up to speed on information I'm sure most people already know. So natural heating. You know, many people don't really know where to start when it comes to understanding the climate emergency. So let me share some of the basics with you. Rays from the sun travel to the earth, warming the atmosphere, land, and water. You can see that with the yellow squiggly lines. Some of the rays bounce off the earth and radiate out into space, the wavy red lines. However, as greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, gather into the atmosphere, some of the rays are blocked from escaping, thus heating up the climate. And as former Vice President Al Gore, the founder of Climate Reality, points out, we are spewing 152 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into the thin shell of our atmosphere every 24 hours, as if it were an open sewer. And the problem with that is that the Earth's atmosphere is very, very thin and very fragile. And you could see the breathable part of the atmosphere is only 10 miles high. So it's probably about the same distance as it would be driving from Santa Clara University maybe to Palo Alto. So there really isn't a whole lot of room in the atmosphere, and a lot of it is being filled with these gases. Now, if we look at physical evidence collected on Earth, such as ice cores and others, we find that the current level of greenhouse gas is the highest it's been in over 400,000 years. Whereas the level known as parts per million, ppm, has ranged between 180 and 300 ppm for millions of years through glacial periods, volcanic eruptions, and forest fires. The level has just topped, as you can see on the right hand, 420 ppm and is rising by about 2 ppm per year. Climate scientists have informed us that we need to lower this level to no more than 350 ppm to have a climate in the future that resembles the human-friendly climate on Earth that we've enjoyed since the end of the Ice Age. There are numerous sources of emissions called greenhouse gases, from CO2 escaping during the mining and burning of coal for energy generation, and the use of millions of internal combustion cars and trucks, to the nitrous oxide that escapes from the industrial farms when it rains that drains synthetic fertilizer, to the methane that is released from the warming tundra and the billion-plus farm animals on the planet. While addressing one source of emissions would be challenging enough, the fact that this problem is caused by numerous sources makes it that much more complex to solve. Now, as you can see in this pie chart, transportation on the right-hand side in green is responsible for nearly 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions here in California. In many other states, that's lower. We're very, very car-centric, as you know. So it tends to be higher here. In many other states, it's maybe 25% and higher. But when you combine the 40% with electrical power, it adds another 34%. And this tells us that transitioning to electric vehicles and the production of clean, renewable energy are the two key actions that are needed in our state to turn the tide. So let's talk about the consequences and how interconnected they are from climate change. Well, the first is drought and heat. And as Californians, we all are well aware of the increasing frequency and length of droughts. In fact, in the US Southwest, we're predicted to see mega droughts in the not too distant future. In fact, one can argue that we may be in a mega drought right now. Daytime temperatures in the hottest places on the planet are getting hotter and hotter. And just last year in Death Valley, there was recorded a temperature of 130 degrees, the highest ever, excuse me, on the planet. Now, these droughts are causing a loss of fresh water in regions around the world as well. And in Cape Town, South Africa, the city came within a few days of being completely out of fresh water for a city of 500,000 people. More and more cities will be at risk as the climate crisis grows. Now, as we all know as Californians, wildfire is a devastating impact of climate change. What years ago were small fires are now mega fires called firestorms. These enormous fires are now hundreds of thousands of square miles in size and more threatening to wildlife and human life than ever before. And here's a photo of the devastation of the Caldor fire that threatened South Lake Tahoe just last month. Now, according to National Geographic, glaciers, especially at both poles, are melting, believe it or not, 100 times more rapidly than we had previously thought. The sea level rise that results from the melting of snow and ice on land is now speeding up as well. And this is a slow motion time bomb that is difficult to notice until it's too late to address. This would dramatically increase the number of climate refugees around the world who would have to move away from the shoreline. The next consequence that's interrelated is sea level rise. Directly the result of the glacial melting, as well as ocean expansion due to increased heat, sea level rise has already impacted many areas of the world. In this photo, we see an elder with his grandson standing on an island in the South Pacific in the Maldives that is already half submerged, and the average rise in sea level has only been 8 inches to date. On the right, we see a photo of Miami, where they experience what are called sunny day floodings due to the warming of the water off the Florida coast and the porous limestone which lies beneath the city. Needless to say, the number and intensity of storms and hurricanes on the East Coast and in the Gulf has greatly increased over the past decade. Most of these storms are formed in the Caribbean, and the warming of the oceans is causing more moisture to be added to the storms, increasing their intensity. And when there are massive storms, there are inevitably massive floods. This photo depicts people being saved from the flooding that occurred right here in San Jose after a severe storm just a few years ago. Extreme climate events caused by climate change are now affecting every part of the world, not just the third world, not just remote areas, but now the industrialized world. We're seeing climate effects up close. 93% of the heat that's generated by global warming winds up in the ocean. And this massive amount of additional heat causes changes in the chemical makeup of the seawater. The seawater here, shown from the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, becomes more and more acidic, as well as warmer, putting additional stress on coral, which then bleaches the coral and inevitably kills the coral. Now, the extinction rate in the animal kingdom is quickening as well. Whereas in pre-industrial eras, only one species per million could not adapt to the changing conditions on the earth and went extinct. But now 100 to 1,000 species per million are at risk of going extinct. This is especially the case in the oceans, where fish populations are collapsing and species are losing the battle with evolution. I'd now like to show a short, very, very poignant animated video that was created by Greenpeace that depicts the animals that we have already lost. I think that video says it all. Now, there's an impact on change in human health as well. Now, in addition to respiratory health impacts that we might expect due to increased air pollution, climate change is also increasing areas of other diseases and other human conditions. Tropical vector-borne diseases are on the rise as mosquitoes and other bugs that carry these diseases move northward toward warmer areas, cooler areas, rather. Additionally, mental health issues such as anxiety and depression that many, many people are beginning to experience are showing an uptick as the stressors and the consequences of climate change continue to expand. And as a result of all of this, The Lancet, which is a medical journal out of the UK, is estimating that we could see up to 1 billion climate refugees by 2100. And here's a photo of many of these climate refugees that are trying to move from the Middle East during the Syrian conflict to Europe. And this is really only a small glimpse of what could happen. Now, all of that is said and done, paints a very, very bleak picture of what's going on right now. But on the very, very positive side, there are numerous solutions that I am very, very pleased to say are already up and running, already deployed, and in many, many cases being used extensively. And I want to share those with you right now. So, advanced onshore wind turbines. So as you can see, there are a number of types of wind turbine designs. In the upper left photo, we see a standard land-based wind turbine. It has one of its blades painted black, which, believe it or not, diverts flocks of birds from being killed. In the upper right photo, we see a tall bladeless wind turbine that simply moves back and forth in the wind, creating kinetic energy that is then converted to clean electricity. On the lower left, we see what is called an egg beater turbine that is often mounted on commercial rooftops. And on the lower right, we see small personal wind turbines that generate electricity on the roofs, in this case in Europe, similar to solar panels as we have here in the US. Now, additionally, what's coming on very, very strong are what are called offshore turbines. And enormous utility scale wind turbines, offshore turbines, are placed on the ocean dozens of miles offshore. These are actually turbines that exist off the coast of Scotland in Europe. The newest designs have individual blades that, believe it or not, is as long as a football field, 100 yards long. So every time these blades spin around, they produce enormous amounts of renewable energy. These wind turbines are tethered to the bottom of the ocean, but they effectively really float on the surface. The devices generate a huge amount of energy. Most, as I mentioned, are currently located in Europe, off the coast of Britain, Spain, and Norway. They're now being planned for the US, especially in the east, along the Atlantic, adjacent to Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, and Virginia. And we are hopeful and optimistic that they will be installed off the West Coast in the not too distant future. And as a result of all of this deployment of wind turbines, the US now has 122 gigawatts of power installed. And that is enough to power 38 million homes, which is not an insignificant number. And this number has increased dramatically in the past 10 years and has continued to climb as the price of wind-generated electricity continues to fall. Now, here we see two types of utility scale solar farms. On the left is a photovoltaic or PV solar farm. Photovoltaic means light energy, the light of the sun creating the energy. The insert photo on the bottom shows a floating PV farm on a pond on a reservoir in South Korea. This is especially useful when there is limited land available to use for PV. It also conserves water as the solar panels limit evaporation. On the right is a solar thermal farm located in the Mojave. Solar thermal converts the heat of the sun rather than the light of the sun into electricity by boiling a liquid which creates steam that in turn drives a turbine. So the bright, shiny objects on the right photo are not solar panels, they're actually mirrors that reflect the heat of the sun. itself, the U.S. now has over 98 gigawatts of solar power, about 2/3 of what we have in wind. Here's a photo of a solar array that was created by Disney on their Disney World property in Orlando. And what's very wonderful about this is that this solar farm alone creates and produces enough renewable energy to run the entire park. And you may or may not know, more and more companies and utilities are building their own corporate solar farms as well, including many here, excuse me, in California and in the Silicon Valley. So let me show you here a few examples of new solar apps. Solar is being utilized in many new forms. On the top left is a photo of a solar freeway in France. Solar cells are embedded into the road pavement, which generate electricity, except during the split second when the car passes over them. On the top right is a solar train and a solar train station in Australia. The bottom left is actually a photo of my own home in Belmont, where 3 months ago we had a solar roof installed. So instead of mounting solar panels on your roof, you can now have your entire roof become a solar panel. And then finally, the photo on the bottom right, we see a man holding up a piece of solar glass. The glass can be installed as a window on a house or in a building to generate additional solar power. A new source of renewable energy uses water that is in motion. On the left is a tidal turbine. These are placed in a stationary position on the bottom of a bay or a river, and the device rotates when the tide comes in and then rotates in the opposite direction when the tide goes back out. It helps solve what's called the intermittency problem, such as solar when the sun does not shine and wind when the wind isn't blowing. This generates electricity continuously. On the right, we see a wave energy boom, and connected by a wire to an onshore transformer, this energy is generated by the kinetic movement of the bobbing and weaving of the boom into renewable energy. Now, on the architectural front, innovative green designs are making buildings more energy efficient all the time. And you might recognize this. It's a photo of the San Francisco Academy of Sciences in Golden Gate Park. The roof of the building, if you look carefully, is covered by dirt, grasses, and plants. This is a live growing roof. This green roof offers insulation that lowers energy use. It keeps the academy cool in the summer and warm in the winter. It costs less to operate, and it maintains a very, very comfortable, consistent temperature. Now, there's also been innovative product design being created that's doing its part to move the renewable energy revolution forward. On the left, we see a prototype artificial tree made of metal and compostable plastic that serve as, believe it or not, miniature wind turbines. You can see in the inset as the artificial leaves spin in the breeze. On the right, we see an artificial tree reminiscent of a Dr. Seuss prop with solar pads placed on top of the tree. Renewable energy is generated and made available for visitors to the park to recharge their cell phones and laptops. The last innovation that I'll call out is a transition to regenerative agriculture. And this is very, very important as well. And if you remember the pie chart, agriculture was a fairly big chunk of the climate change problem from that particular sector. What's happening right now is that farms are beginning to shift their operations in many cases to a regenerative method of farming, as you can see, with partners with nature, which protects the soil, which is very, very important. It adds diversity to the field, not just a single monoculture crop like soybeans or corn. And it lives really in harmony with diverse animals and plants. Regenerative processes include the planting of seeds using a no-till method, the planting of cover crops between seasons, and the addition of grazing animals on fields to improve the soil. And I'm very, very pleased to report that this movement has gained a lot of strength and a lot of momentum here in California in the agricultural sector, where we are moving forward very rapidly with this. Now, let me shift for a minute. I want to talk a little bit about the IPCC and COP26. And you may not be familiar with any of this, but I think it's important because it's very, very timely. The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And this is an organization that was formed by the UN over 30 years ago. It just released a portion of its sixth climate assessment report last month, 2 months ago. Their reports assess existing science, technology, socioeconomic information pertaining to climate change. This is an organization that's set up to really collate and curate all of the climate studies that have been done worldwide that are peer-reviewed, pulling them together to assess the latest and the most up-to-date and the most important, impactful climate change science. 3 decades have passed since the first report was published. And since that time, unfortunately, annual global carbon emissions have doubled. And the important thing about this most recent report is the severity of it. UN Secretary General Guterres calls this recent assessment report a code red for humanity. And a few of the highlights I wanted to point out, in addition to part 1 that was just released, there will be a part 2 and 3 on consequences of the climate crisis and solutions the UN are recommending. That'll be out in the next few months. And to give you an idea of the scope of this process, the IPCC had 234 scientific authors reviewing 14,000 of these scientific papers. And the full report is 4,000 pages long. So unless you've been working on this project or you're a really dedicated scientist, you're not reading it all. But there are many, many summary reports that are accessible and read widely. And the most important highlight that I really want to point out that I think alluded to a moment ago is that the IPCC have now stated that it is, quote, unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, oceans, and land. And that's important because over the past 30 years, they've slowly but surely increased the probability from their perspective that human impact is the primary cause of climate change. Earlier on, they talked about natural cycles. They talked about various impacts in the environment that weren't human caused. Now they are decisively stating that it's unequivocal that human influence is doing it. As a result, we can only release another 500 gigatons of carbon emissions, which is a lot, but we've released already 2,400 gigawatts to date. And If we do this, which is a tall task, we will only have a 50-50 chance of stabilizing warming at 1.5 degrees centigrade. And we're right now at about 1.2 degrees centigrade. So we're really at the cusp of that particular level. The important thing that the highlight points out is that every additional fraction of a degree of warming that we prevent helps us stabilize the climate at a safer level. So we can't just talk about 1 or 2 or 3 degrees centigrade. We have to use 1.5, 1.6, 1.65, whatever we can level off the warming at and stabilize the climate will help future generations navigate this changed world. They also point out, which is not really surprising, that most of the world's countries, even wealthiest countries, are ill-prepared for escalating climate impacts. This talks about not only mitigation, but climate adaptation. Our countries adapted to be able to deal with higher sea level, with more intensive droughts, more intensive storms. The answer in most cases is no. And COP26 is the meeting of countries in the IPCC. That's upcoming next month. It's going to be November 1st through the 12th. It was rescheduled from 2020 because of the pandemic. It will be held in Glasgow, Scotland. So the UK will be the host country. And the goals of the COP26 are as follows: to secure global net zero by 2050, which is universally seen as very, very critical, and to keep 1.5 degrees centigrade within reach. Secondly, to provide adaptation, as I alluded to earlier, to protect communities and habitats, to deliver at least $100 billion per year to poor countries for adaptation. This is something that was determined and agreed upon in the Paris Accord back in 2015. Unfortunately, this hasn't been reached, which it really needs to be picked up so poor countries can adapt. And another goal is to work together as a world community to solve the climate crisis, and to do that in a more integrated way. So this brings us to what can you do? And this is very, very important. First, take individual action. You can discuss climate change with friends and family, and I really encourage you to do so. But when you do so, share the solutions to the climate crisis. Don't only wallow on the problems. The problems are critical. They do need to be understood, but we really need to understand and share the solutions to spread more encouragement, more optimism, and inspire more people to take action. Another thing you may not have thought about is simplify your life. Simply buy less stuff. The less amount of commodities that all of us purchase slows down the depletion of resources on the planet. Another is eat a plant-based diet and also reduce food waste. That's very, very important. Approximately 30 to 40% of all food is wasted. That's primarily in the industrialized world. And eating a plant-based diet with very, very minimal meat is not only good for the planet, it's good for our bodies as well. You're encouraged to bike and walk rather than ride in cars or drive a car. That really does help. And then also on the political side, write your elected officials to take action on the climate emergency. And I would encourage you to join the local Climate Reality Bay Area chapter that I am a part of. And I'd encourage you to go to climaterealitybayarea.org. You can get more information about the chapter. We have approximately 1,400 members of the chapter from as far north as Sonoma, as far south as San Jose, and as far east as Lafayette. So there are many, many opportunities to volunteer, to learn more about the climate crisis, and to become involved. Now, another thing you could do, and I was asking Paula what the situation at Santa Clara is to promote fossil fuel stock divestment. And you may or may not know, this was a campaign started by 350.org, climate organization, over 10 years ago. And the college endowment investment funds were targeted, and many prominent colleges have already divested, including the UC system, Harvard, many other schools in the Ivy League, but some have not, including Stanford. And I'm pretty sure Santa Clara is in that group as well. So this is very, very important. To date, more than $13 trillion has been divested from fossil fuels. Now, why is this important? It's critical because these funds in endowments, in investment funds, often target the development of fossil fuel drilling and are provided to fossil fuel companies to continue, unfortunately, their destructive techniques and processes. Another is to take collective action. Individual steps can certainly be taken to address the climate crisis. But while these actions are helpful, the right thing for us to do is to collectively move to change the number of carbon down to 350 ppm. A few months ago, the climate activist helped founded 350.org, Bill McKibben, had a very common question posed to him that I've had posed to me as well. The question was, what's the most important thing I can do to fight climate change? His answer, change the I to we. We must come together to create the change we so desperately need. There are hundreds of climate organizations one can join to take action with other activists. Here are a few of the most prominent ones. I mentioned Climate Reality, 350, Sunrise Movement, Extinction Rebellion, Citizens Climate Lobby. I really urge you to go to some of these websites if you haven't already. Find out what they're up to, learn about their activity and their position, and become involved as you can. And youth, especially girls, are really leading on climate activism. In Fridays for the Future, obviously that was something inspired by Greta Thunberg, and now thousands of people, if not millions around the world, are following her lead. Another organization called Zero Hour was founded here in the US in the Seattle area by a 16-year-old Jamie Margolin. And then lastly, on the right, Sunrise Movement, an army of young people, mostly college age, demonstrating and supporting leaders who stand up for the health and well-being of all people, led by Varshina Prakesh. So in closing, let me share a few thoughts. There are essential climate science basics that I'd really love for you to take away. And if there's only one thing that you recall from this presentation, make sure this is it. Number one, it's getting warmer. The average temperature around the world is now 1.2 degrees centigrade higher than it was prior to the start of the Industrial Revolution. And we know that from scientific evaluation and research. It's us. Although nature does slightly contribute to warming, human activity is the overwhelming cause, and that became very, very clear from the IPCC assessment report number 6. We're sure up to 99% of all climate scientists agree from peer studies that climate change is here and we have to address it. Fourth, it's bad. I've pointed out how bad it is. It's not only already bad, but global warming and the climate crisis is getting progressively worse. And then last, optimistically, we can fix it. After decades of denial and inaction, we still have almost a decade to lower carbon emissions by 45% in order to have a chance in limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade. So again, if you remember only one thing from this presentation, this is it. And with that, thank you. And we can get into the question and answer period right now. And let me stop sharing. All right. Hello, everyone. Paula, do you want to check the chat box and maybe read a few out to me?
Yeah, sure. Folks, if you have a question or a comment or point of discussion, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can unmute, of course, and shout them out, raise your hand, whatever's best. I kind of have a question myself.
Sure.
I know that your last point in your kind of concluding remarks was about optimism. It's really, as I'm an environmental studies major, so oftentimes I feel like it's kind of like overwhelming and negative, and we're all doomed. But is there anything that you do to stay like optimistic yourself, because you're like immersed in this as well? You've been doing it for so long.
Yeah, that's very, very important, Paula. Yeah, it is overwhelming. It is tremendously negative. And the very, very common result is to be very anxious and or depressed. However, I firmly believe that we're not doomed as a civilization. There's still time. As I mentioned, there's a lot going on the solution side. There's a lot behind the scenes happening that hasn't been happening before. More and more countries are addressing this. More and more laws are being passed, even here in the US, which has been a laggard with climate action at the governmental level, at the federal level. The reconciliation bill, the Build Back Better bill that funds a lot of climate activism is currently being debated. I'm optimistic about that. And the other reason that I have optimism, and my optimism wanes, it's not totally strong. Sometimes I'll feel less optimistic than others, is because I'm part of an organization that collectively is taking a stand and addressing it. And this is why I think it's really important that for those of us on this call who are interested in this topic is to get involved either with Climate Reality, 350.org, Sunrise Movement, Citizens Climate Lobby. It doesn't really matter. But if you can be around like-minded individuals, especially young folks like yourself, who have their entire lives ahead of them, you could better understand the problem and you could begin to take action around it. That in and of itself generates hope. And I think you'll find that to be the case. Any other questions? Anybody have any comments? Any thoughts that they'd like to share? Don't be shy. Okay, let's see. I see one coming in here from Anya. How did you first get into this line of work and what inspired you? That's a great question. Well, Anya, in my working career, as Paula pointed out earlier in the intro, I've been active in human resources in many, many large companies, Apple, and Intuit and Palm and other companies. And during that period of time, I got involved in corporate social responsibility, which is a movement that has been building over the past 30 years or so. It's also called sustainability, corporate sustainability. And I happened to get involved as a volunteer at one of my companies about 20 years ago. Got very, very involved in what corporations can do to address global warming, the climate crisis around their operations. I found that to be very, very stimulating. I started learning more and more about the topic. I was able to retire early. And shortly after I retired, because of all the contacts that I had in the climate movement, I got an email from the Climate Reality Project inviting me to attend a training. And this is pre-COVID, where there were trainings that were in person. And this happened to be in Toronto, Canada. And I was able to take the training. And it was amazing and very, very inspiring and powerful. And as a result, what I did was come back to the community here in the Bay Area and began my own climate activism. And then since then have gotten more involved with other organizations as well, and primarily are giving talks like this one, helping newer and younger climate activists come up to speed with their activism. And one thing led to another, and that's kind of where I am right now. Okay, we have another question from Ketty Hickman. Do you have any recommendations on books, videos we could look at in order to share information with friends, families who don't take this issue as seriously as it should be? Okay. That's an absolutely imperative question. Number one, what I always encourage people to do, like yourselves, who are really interested in this issue and very, very concerned about its impact, is to not stress yourself by feeling as though you have to convince or change every denier or doubter's mind about this issue. There is a group of people, an element of people, fortunately, it's no more than maybe 10% of the population, who are hardcore deniers that this exists. And we won't get into the reasons why. Fortunately, most of those people are not in Northern California. So we're in a very, very unique bubble, if you will, where most people do understand it. Many, many people are taking the initiative to address it. But the important thing to recognize is that you don't have to convince people, but where there are people in your community, in your family who are interested, share information with them, but especially, again, share the optimistic part of the story. Give them reasons for hope, give them reasons for involvement, direct them into the right ways. In terms of books and videos, there are a bunch of them. A few come to mind. One by a very, very influential author, Naomi Klein. The book is called This Changes Everything. It was written about 3 years ago. It's specifically about the climate crisis and how the crisis really intersects with capitalism and how capitalism really spurs on the worst parts of the crisis. In terms of videos, there are many, many films out there. There are films by Bill McKibben. There are films by the naturalist in England. His name escapes me right now. Who talks a lot about climate change. And I think the easiest thing to do would literally be go to Google and type in climate change articles or climate change books or climate change videos or movies, and you could find a listing of many, many of them. Oh, thank you, Paula, for the book website. Okay, where's another one here? Dylan has one. What do you think about the current US political administration? Are they going to be effective enough in taking steps to aid in the environment? Well, I hope so. I'm optimistic that we're going to be making progress here during the Biden administration. I'm starting to get worried, though, that the longer this debate goes on, the more and more the Build Back Better reconciliation bill will get watered down by moderate and conservative forces. And even though $3.5 trillion sounds like and is a huge amount of money. You have to remember that that would be stretched over 10 years and is a fraction of what the world and what the US would need to pay in damages to the environment and to the population should all of these disasters begin to happen with climate change. So I am optimistic. It's going to take more than the Build Back Better program. It's going to take lots of other countries, especially China, India, Russia, the EU, which is doing a lot, to step up and do a lot more. But what I'm seeing here in the US in the post-Trump era is that the federal government is finally taking this seriously, at least the Democratic Party in the federal government, where it hadn't at all. In fact, we were going backward during the Trump era. Now we're making progress, but we need to really step that up as quickly as possible. Okay, I guess that's it. If there's no other questions, I guess we could call it a day. I want to thank everyone for their attendance, for their listening. I want to wish everyone the best of luck in your college career and in your professional careers moving forward. If anyone has any information they'd like about climate reality, you want to get in touch with me, please contact Paula or Kristen at SCU tUrn. And I want to thank those guys for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. So with that, take care, and we'll see you around. Bye-bye.